Hey guys, welcome to episode 17 of the England series. So in the last episode, we left King Charles with a problem. He was going to have to decide whether he would sign the Petition of Right put forth by Parliament or not. And, well, Charles caved. He signed it, granting them all they asked for. It didn't mean he was happy about it, but he needed cash, and he needed it bad. So he did what he had to. But the new arrangement didn't even last a month. Once he got what he wanted, the king increasingly felt like backing out of this new agreement. Among other things, he was particularly upset with the way Parliament had changed how shipping duties on merchant vessels were collected. And just to clarify, duties is just a kind of taxes. You see, for many years and monarchs before, shipping duties had been collected by kings for the whole year, every year. But according to this petition, now Charles could only collect the money once a year, and only with Parliament's consent. And apparently he was also thinking about donuts? Okay, this is weird. You're not supposed to be able to read people's thoughts. Let's move on. With his typical stubbornness, Charles simply fixed his problem by calling for Parliament to take a break, and went right back to collecting shipping duties the old way. But then, a terrible thing happened. Duke George Villiers was assassinated. And no, it wasn't a ninja, and he didn't get a piano dropped on his head. Actually, we don't really need to see what happened. He had been sitting drinking in a tavern one night when an assassin sprang up and stabbed him. Villiers leapt from his seat. "Villain!" he cried. He rushed toward the murderer, but alas, the wound was a deadly one, and he fell to the earth. Thus was the sad end of the Duke of Buckingham. You can imagine the king's grief when he heard the awful tale. One witness said he threw himself upon his bed and shed many bitter tears. But while the king lay weeping in his chamber, many of the people in England celebrated the horrible event. They even said Villiers' murderer was a hero. Charles lost his best advisor and friend in George Villiers. Now, suddenly, his wife Henrietta began to fill that position. For years leading up to this, the king had mostly neglected her. To him, she was little more than a way to keep good relations with France. He hadn't truly loved her. They hadn't got along very well either. But everything changed with the death of Villiers. Charles and Henrietta grew very close, and she began to bear much influence on the affairs of the kingdom. Whether this influence was for good or evil, we shall soon discover. A few months later, Charles decided to reopen Parliament. He did so at his own hazard. The House of Commons was angry again. "You've broken the Petition of Right," they complained. "And not only did you collect shipping duties without our permission, you threw John Roll in prison and stole his goods when he refused to pay." All this was true. But frankly, Charles didn't care. He was the king after all. Shouldn't he just be able to do whatever he wanted? This second session of Parliament went on for about 2 months, and still the king had done nothing to settle the complaints. And now he was calling for another break. But before the Speaker of the House could rise from his seat, for this is always how a meeting of the House of Commons is ended, some of the men decided to take matters into their own hands. They leapt up and pinned the Speaker down in his chair. If he could not get up, then Parliament could not end. A resolution was quickly read to stop the collection of shipping duties and the spread of Catholicism and Arminianism, which Arminianism was just another kind of religion that Parliament didn't like. Instead of voting the usual way, the members simply shouted their approval out loud. In this wild disorder, the resolution was passed. They were going to get what they wanted, whether the king liked it or not. Well, the king didn't like it. This was the last straw. The last straw. You know, I never was really sure where that expression came from. I mean, are we talking straw or drinking straws? I don't know. Anyway, it was the last straw, whatever kind of straw it was. He was so angry he locked up 9 members of the House of Commons in prison and dissolved Parliament entirely. It simply wasn't worth it. If all Parliament was going to do was cause trouble every time he called them, then what was the point? From now on, Charles would rule as king and king alone. This act opens a period of history often called the personal rule, because the king would rule England and Scotland personally, without the help or hindrance of anyone else. In the next episode, we'll see what it was like to live under this personal rule.